Every single one of us has been there, that place where the weight feels too heavy, the night feels too long, and the heart says, I can't take much more of this. We've all been in that moment where negative feelings wrap around us like chains, convincing us this is the end of the road. But here's the truth, it's not the end, it's a bend, and just on the other side of that bend is a life you can't even imagine yet. Endurance isn't about grinding your teeth and just hanging on, it's about learning how to transform your mind so that you are not dragged by your feelings, but driven by your vision. And when you understand what's waiting for you on the other side of endurance, you'll stop seeing your current struggle as a punishment and start seeing it as preparation. Asterisk, when life presses you to the edge, when it feels like everything you're holding on to is slipping out of your grasp, that's when endurance becomes the bridge you have to step onto. But here's what most people misunderstand about endurance. It's not just about holding on with white knuckles and hoping the storm will pass. Endurance is an active, living force inside you. It's the ability to stand in the middle of chaos and keep your eyes fixed on where you're going instead of where you are. Most people think of endurance as waiting, but waiting implies passivity. Endurance is not passive. Endurance is the choice to move forward internally, even if the external circumstances look completely against you. When negative feelings hit, they don't just knock politely and wait for you to open the door, they barge in, they take over your thoughts, your mood, your energy. They tell you stories about how nothing will change, how the pain will last forever, how you're wasting your time even trying. And if you believe those stories, you start to let go of the bridge. You start to convince yourself it's easier to turn back, to give in, to stop pushing forward. But what you can't see in that moment is that the breakthrough you've been praying for, the result you've been working toward, is on the other side of the exact moment you feel like giving up. The bridge of endurance is not some metaphorical fairy tale. It is real, and you're standing on it every time you choose to keep moving despite the pull of negative emotions. You have to understand that the bridge is not smooth. It sways in the wind, it creaks under your weight. Some days it feels like it's going to snap, but the bridge exists to connect two places, where you are and where you're meant to be. The problem is that most people turn around halfway because they can't see the destination. They confuse not being able to see the end with there being no end. That's why endurance is so powerful. It doesn't require you to see the finish line. It requires you to trust that the finish line exists. It's a mental posture that says, I will take one more step. Even if the fog is thick, even if my heart is heavy, even if my legs are trembling. Negative feelings are like storms that gather around the bridge. They don't appear to push you forward, they appear to push you off. Fear, doubt, frustration, despair, they all try to pull you into the water below. And if you let those feelings dictate your actions, you will find yourself in the current, swept back to the starting point. But when you trained yourself to see negative feelings as weather and not as truth, you can stand on that bridge, in the middle of that wind, and know deep down that the sun is still there above the clouds. The bridge still leads forward, no matter how dark it looks in the moment. Endurance transforms you not because of what's at the other side, but because of who you become while crossing. You start the journey one way, uncertain, hesitant, maybe even scared, and each step forces you to prove to yourself that you can keep going without visible proof that you're almost there. This reshapes your mind. It rewires your belief system. Every time you take another step despite the feeling screaming at you to quit, you're strengthening a muscle that will serve you for the rest of your life. And here's the part most people don't realize. This transformation is happening in the exact moments you want. Avoid the moments where it hurts, the moments where it feels unfair, the moments where your body and mind are begging you to stop. Those are the crucible moments where endurance is built, brick by brick, choice by choice. Think about the last time you faced something that made you want to give up. You probably thought, I can't do this anymore, yet somehow you did. Maybe you took a break, maybe you slowed down, but you didn't quit entirely. And when you finally made it through, you looked back and realized that the hardest moment wasn't the end, the hardest moment was the middle. That's because the middle is where your mind is tested. It's the place where the new reality hasn't arrived yet, and the old reality is still trying to pull you back. The middle is the proving ground. It's where endurance is either built or broken. And that's why the middle matters so much, because everything on the other side depends on whether or not you cross it. When you start seeing endurance as the bridge to transformation, negative feelings lose their ultimate power over you. They don't disappear instantly, but they stop being the dictators of your life. You begin to understand that feelings are like waves. They rise, they crash, they recede. Endurance is your anchor. You stand firm, letting the wave pass, and when it does, you're still on your feet. That's the real test. Not how good you feel when everything is easy, but how steady you remain when everything in you wants to turn around. The irony is that on the bridge, the closer you get to the other side, the more intense the wind can feel. That's because you're leaving behind the old you, and the old you doesn't let go without a fight. But each step you take is a declaration that you are not ruled by your emotions. You are guided by your decision to move forward, and here's another truth most people miss. Endurance is not built in the absence of struggle. It's built in the presence of it. You can't learn to endure when everything is going your way. You can only learn it when you're pressed, when the weight is heavy, when you feel like you're being stretched beyond your limit. It's in those moments that you discover your actual capacity is far greater than you thought. The bridge teaches you that the limit you believed in was an illusion. You only find that out by walking further than you thought you could. And once you've proven that to yourself once, you carry that confidence into every other challenge you face. You begin to see that endurance is not the punishment, it's the passage. Negative feelings might scream louder as you move forward, but they're not signs that you should stop. They're signs that you're closer to the other side than you've ever been. And when you finally realize that, you stop resenting the bridge and start respecting it. You see it for what it is, the necessary crossing between the life you have and the life you're meant to live. Every step you take on it, no matter how hard, is moving you away from the prison of your current limitations and closer to a reality where those limitations don't exist anymore. Your mind is not just a place where thoughts randomly pop in and out like uninvited guests. It's a manufacturing plant constantly producing, shaping, and delivering the feelings you experience every single day. Every emotion you've ever felt, joy, fear, anger, excitement, hopelessness, love, has been the result of something first processed in the mind. Feelings are not independent forces floating around in the air waiting to land on you. They are the direct result of the thought patterns you allow to run in your head over and over again. When you truly grasp this, you begin to see that negative feelings are not mysterious curses sent by fate. They are outcomes, products on the assembly line of your own thinking. Imagine a factory where every machine is programmed to take raw materials and create a final product. Your thoughts are the raw materials. The more often you feed the factory a certain kind of material, the more often you'll see that kind of product come out at the other end. If the raw material you're sending in is self-doubt, fear, or worry, the factory will inevitably produce feelings that match anxiety, insecurity, hopelessness. The machine doesn't care whether the material is good or bad. It just produces according to the blueprint you've set. The mind works exactly the same way. It doesn't question whether your thoughts are beneficial or destructive. It simply takes whatever you repeat and builds feelings to match. This means that negative feelings are not random punishments. They are results. And just like in any production process, if you want a different result, you must change the input. You can't keep sending the same negative patterns of thought into your mind and expect it to suddenly start producing confidence and joy. Yet that's exactly what many people do. They dwell on their failures, their fears, their worst case scenarios, and then they wonder why they feel heavy, unmotivated, and hopeless. The problem isn't that life is inherently against them, it's that their mental blueprint is set to manufacture those exact emotions. When you start to shift your thinking, even in small ways, you'll notice something extraordinary. The production line in your mind begins to slow down on the negative items and ramp up the creation of positive, empowering feelings. But it doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. You have to take charge of what's coming into your mental factory. That means paying attention to yourself, to the conversations you allow, to the media you consume, to the people you surround yourself with. Every single one of these inputs is raw material. If you keep feeding the factory with trash, don't be surprised when you keep feeling like trash. If you feed it with vision, gratitude, and possibility, the feelings that result will naturally shift to match. Think about a day when you woke up in a good mood. Nothing extraordinary happened, but you felt light, energized, ready to take on the day. Then you hear bad news or start thinking about something that went wrong last week, and suddenly your mood crashes. What changed? The external event may have triggered it, but the shift happened because your mind switched the raw material on the conveyor belt. It replaced empowering thoughts with discouraging ones, and the factory immediately produced matching feelings. This is how precise the connection is. Change the thought and you will change the feeling. It's important to understand that feelings have a lag time. If you've been running negative thoughts through your mental machinery for a long time, you won't necessarily feel better the instant you think one positive thought. It's like trying to stop a massive industrial conveyor belt that's been running at full speed. It takes consistent effort to slow it down, stop it, and reverse the direction. The old patterns may still produce their products for a while even after you start changing your input. That's why so many people give up too soon. They expect instant results, and when they don't feel different right away, they assume it isn't working. But the truth is, the new raw material is already moving through the system. Given enough repetition and time, the factory will only be producing in the new direction. This is where discipline comes in. The mind will always default to familiar patterns unless you consciously intervene. If your default has been to dwell on problems, expect the mind to try and pull you back there when you attempt to change. It's not sabotage, it's simply habit. Your mental machinery is used to certain settings. Your job is to reprogram those settings through deliberate repetition of new, empowering thoughts. At first, it might feel fake. You might tell yourself, I am capable, I am worthy, I am moving forward, while still feeling fear or doubt. That's normal. Remember, the feelings you have now are the product of old thoughts. Keep feeding the factory with the new material long enough, and eventually the emotional output will align with it. One of the most powerful realizations you can have is that feelings are not dictators, they're indicators. They're the proof of what's been happening in your thought life. If you feel defeated, that's not a prophecy, it's feedback. It's telling you, here's what you've been thinking about. If you feel energized and hopeful, it's the same thing, proof of your current thought patterns. This is why managing your thinking is not optional. If you want to master your emotions, you cannot wait for your feelings to change before you think better thoughts. That's like a factory manager saying, we'll change the raw materials once the products start coming out differently. It doesn't work that way. You start with the input and the output will follow. This understanding completely changes the way you deal with negative feelings. Instead of fighting the feeling itself, which often just makes it stronger, you go straight to the source. You ask yourself, what thoughts have I been running that would naturally create this feeling? And then you swap the input. If you're feeling fear because you've been picturing everything going wrong, you deliberately create a mental image of things going right. If you're feeling unworthy because you've been replaying your mistakes, you choose to replay your wins, your growth, the moment you proved yourself stronger than you thought. You stop wrestling with the emotion and instead reprogram the production line that created it in the first place. And here's the beauty of it. The more you practice this, the more automatic it becomes. Just like a factory that upgrades its machinery to work more efficiently, your mind will begin to default to producing better feelings without constant effort. You will have trained it to take in empowering raw material as a habit, and the emotional output will reflect that. Instead of constantly reacting to negative feelings, you'll notice they show up less often and fade faster when they do appear. You'll be able to trace every emotional state back to its mental root, and you'll know exactly how to shift it because you've learned the connection between the blueprint and the product. You cannot get rid of a negative feeling by staring at it, analyzing it, and wrestling with it in your mind. The more attention you give to a negative thought or emotion, the more energy it gains, and the more deeply it roots itself in your subconscious. This is one of the greatest traps people fall into. They think that if they can just figure out why they feel bad or replay the situation enough times, the feeling will dissolve. But it rarely works that way. The human mind doesn't erase by focusing harder on the problem, it erases by replacing. This is the law of substitution in action. You can't think about two things with full attention at the same time. If your mind is absorbed with one dominant idea, the other has no room to exist. The reason this is so powerful is because it bypasses the endless cycle of fighting with your feelings. If you've ever tried to not think about something, you know how impossible it feels. Tell yourself, don't think about the mistake you made, and what's the first image that pops into your mind? The mistake. Tell yourself, stop feeling anxious, and suddenly you feel your heart race even faster. This is because the subconscious mind responds to the core image or idea, not the word don't. When you keep trying to push a negative thought away, you're still holding onto it mentally. It's still the star of the show. The law of substitution says that instead of pushing against it, you replace it with something else so completely that the old thought has nowhere to live. This is why people who are deeply passionate about a vision or goal often find their negative feelings fade while they're immersed in it. When you are fully engaged in building something, learning something new, or visualizing your desired future with vivid detail, the mind doesn't have space to keep playing the old, destructive tape. Your emotional state changes not because you forced it, but because you shifted your attention entirely. The subconscious begins to accept the new thought as the main directive, and your feelings begin to align with it. Replacing a thought is not about pretending the problem doesn't exist. It's about refusing to feed it more energy than it already has. The moment you notice your mind drifting to something that drains you, you choose a higher thought, one that pulls you toward the person you want to be and the life you want to live. This could be as simple as recalling a moment you felt deeply confident, imagining a future scenario that excites you, or focusing on something you're grateful for. The key is to engage with the new thought fully. Half-hearted substitution won't work because the old thought will still dominate. You have to give the replacement thought so much attention, detail, and emotional energy that the old one is pushed entirely out of the mental spotlight. Consider how this works in everyday life. If you walk into a dark room, you don't get rid of the darkness by pushing it out. You turn on the light. The darkness disappears not because you fought it, but because you introduced something more powerful that took its place. The law of substitution works the same way with feelings. Darkness and light cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Neither can fear and faith, gratitude and resentment, or despair and hope. One will always crowd out the other. If you feel stuck in a negative emotional state, your job is to turn on the light in your mind by flooding it with an idea, image, or belief that's stronger than what you're currently feeling. The challenge most people face is that their replacement thoughts are weak and untrained. They try to think positively for a few seconds, but because they haven't built the muscle of holding that thought, the old feeling quickly takes over again. This is why substitution must be practiced deliberately. The more you practice holding a constructive thought, really holding it, engaging with it, feeling it, the easier it becomes to sustain it long enough to change your emotional state. Just as a weak light bulb might flicker in a large dark room, a weak thought will be overpowered by a strong, habitual negative one. But with practice, the light becomes brighter and more steady, and eventually the darkness simply has no chance. Substitution also works best when the replacement thought is connected to a vision or purpose that genuinely matters to you. If you try to replace fear with a thought you don't truly believe or care about, your mind will reject it. But if you replace it with a mental picture of something you deeply desire, a goal, a person you want to become, an experience you want to have, your subconscious will engage with it more fully because it feels real and emotionally rewarding. That emotional connection is the fuel that allows the new thought to override the old one. This isn't just theory, it's how the mind has always worked. You've already used the law of substitution, probably without realizing it. Think about a time when you were upset about something, but then got distracted by an exciting piece of news or an urgent task. For a while, you forgot to be upset because your attention was completely consumed by the new focus. When you came back to the original problem later, it might have even felt less intense. That's substitution in action. The new dominant thought temporarily displaced the old one. The key is learning to use this intentionally, not just by accident. When negative feelings arise, you can make a conscious decision. I will not feed this. I will choose something else to think about, something that lifts me. This might mean closing your eyes and visualizing your future in vivid color. It might mean speaking out loud affirmations that remind you of your strength. It might mean replaying a memory where you succeeded against the odds. Whatever you choose, the point is to give your mind a different target so completely that the old thought fades naturally. Over time, the brain will get used to making this shift faster. You won't have to wrestle with feelings for hours or days. You'll recognize them, switch the thought, and feel the emotional shift almost immediately. The law of substitution also explains why trying to control your feelings directly can be exhausting. Feelings are downstream from thoughts. If you focus on changing the feeling without changing the thought, you're trying to fix the symptom without addressing the cause. By going straight to the thought and replacing it, you cut the process off at the root. The negative feeling has nothing left to stand on. Once you see how this works, you begin to realize you're never truly trapped in an emotional state. You may feel stuck in the moment, but the power to redirect your mind is always available. The more you exercise it, the more resilient you become. You stop fearing negative emotions because you know you have the tool to shift them at will. The old thoughts may still try to creep back, but now you recognize them instantly and replace them before they can regain strength. And with each successful substitution, your mind becomes more loyal to the new patterns than the old ones. People often confuse endurance with sheer willpower, the idea that if you just grit your teeth hard enough, clench your fists, and push through, you'll make it to the other side. But that's why so many people burn out halfway through the journey. Willpower is like a match. It can spark quickly and burn bright, but it doesn't last long on its own. Once it burns out, if you have nothing else fueling you, you're left in the dark. Vision, on the other hand, is like a steady flame that never goes out as long as you keep feeding it. Vision gives you a reason to endure that is bigger than the discomfort you're facing right now. It's the picture in your mind of what's possible, and that picture is what pulls you forward when everything else is trying to push you back. When you rely only on willpower, you're essentially fighting your current reality head on with raw force. You wake up each day and tell yourself, I just have to push harder, hang on longer. And maybe you do for a while, but willpower is emotionally expensive. It drains your energy because it's fueled by resistance. You're resisting the urge to quit, resisting the temptation to take the easy way out, resisting the negative feelings. Resistance can be useful in short bursts, but it's exhausting to maintain day after day. That's why you see people start strong on a new goal, but after the initial surge of motivation wears off, they slide back into old habits. Their vision wasn't strong enough to carry them when willpower faded. Vision works differently. Vision doesn't just push you from behind, it pulls you from ahead. When you have a clear, detailed mental image of the life you want, the person you want to become, or the result you're aiming for, it creates a magnetic effect. You don't have to force yourself as much because the desire to reach that picture draws you forward naturally. Vision gives meaning to your struggle. Without meaning, struggle feels pointless, and that's when people quit. But when you can see in your mind's eye exactly where you're headed, the struggle becomes part of the story, not the end of it. This is why two people can face the exact same level of difficulty, and one will quit while the other keeps going. The difference isn't necessarily that one is stronger or more disciplined, it's that one has a vision that makes the pain worth enduring. The one without vision is relying solely on willpower, and when that runs out, they have nothing left to hold onto. The one with vision knows that every step, no matter how hard, is taking them closer to something they've already claimed in their mind. They may still feel tired, frustrated, or overwhelmed, but they're anchored to a bigger picture that doesn't let them drift away. Vision also gives you a context for your current pain. If you see yourself as simply suffering, with no clear destination, your mind will do whatever it can to get you out of that discomfort, including quitting. But if you see yourself as investing in your future, the discomfort changes meaning. A runner who's training for a marathon doesn't see their sore muscles as a sign they should stop. They see them as proof they're getting closer to race day. Someone building a business doesn't see a tough month as a sign they're failing. They see it as part of the building process. In both cases, it's the vision of the finish line that reframes the pain. Clarity of your vision determines the strength of its pull. A vague vision, I want to be successful, I want to be happy, doesn't have much power because it doesn't engage your senses or emotions. The mind responds to specificity. If you can close your eyes and see your future in detail, sights, the sounds, the feelings of it, your subconscious begins to accept it as real. Once it accepts it, it starts to move you toward it automatically. The clearer the vision, the less you have to rely on raw willpower because your mind is already aligning your thoughts, decisions, and actions with that picture. This is why people who endure through unimaginable challenges often speak about keeping their eyes on the prize. That's not just a nice phrase, it's the mental discipline of focusing more on where you're going than on what you're going through. Your current reality might be full of obstacles, but your vision keeps you connected to a reality that's bigger than those obstacles. It keeps you moving forward even when your body is tired and your emotions are screaming for relief. You stop asking, how much longer do I have to do this? And start telling yourself, every step I take is bringing me closer. Another reason vision outlasts willpower is that vision inspires emotion, and emotion is the real driver of endurance. Willpower can push you through a task you don't want to do, but without emotion behind it, it feels like drudgery. Vision stirs feelings of excitement, pride, gratitude, even love for what you're working toward. Those emotions are fuel. They make the work lighter because you're emotionally invested in the outcome. It's no longer just about surviving the moment. It's about creating something you care deeply about. But vision isn't something you set once and forget. It has to be nurtured. Life will constantly throw distractions, doubts, and discouragement in your path. And if you don't keep your vision in front of you, those things will start to dim it. You have to revisit your vision daily through visualization, journaling, affirmations, or whatever method helps you keep it vivid. The more real it feels in your mind, the more it will sustain you through the moments when willpower alone would fail. When you learn to anchor your endurance in vision, you also stop seeing temporary setbacks as permanent defeats. A person fueled only by willpower will see a setback as evidence that maybe they're not cut out for the goal. A person fueled by vision sees a setback as a plot twist in the journey. They adjust, they learn, they keep going not because it's easy, but because they're already committed to the destination in their mind. The vision doesn't disappear just because the path got harder. If anything, the difficulty makes the vision more valuable. This is why endurance without vision can feel like punishment, but endurance with vision feels like purpose. When you're enduring for something you truly care about, the process itself begins to change you. You become more patient, more focused, more resilient, not because you're forcing yourself to be those things, but because the vision you've committed to demands it from you. And in meeting those demands, you grow into the kind of person who can handle the life you're building. Vision doesn't just pull you toward the future, it shapes you into the person who can thrive when you get there. Your self-image is the silent architect behind everything you do, think, and feel. It's the internal blueprint. Carry the story you've been telling yourself, consciously or unconsciously, about who you are, what you deserve, and what you're capable of handling. Every decision you make, every limit you hit, every goal you pursue or abandon is filtered through that image. You can only endure challenges up to the point that aligns with how you see yourself. If your self-image is small, fragile, or built on past failures, your endurance will collapse the moment the pressure rises above what you believe you can take. If your self-image is strong, resilient, and rooted in a belief that you are capable and worthy, you will endure far beyond what you thought possible. The reason this matters so much is that people often think endurance is purely about physical stamina or mental toughness in the moment. But when you strip away the surface, endurance is about identity. You will not fight for a reality you do not believe belongs to you. If deep down you don't see yourself as someone who wins, someone who finishes, someone who can handle adversity, you'll quit the moment it feels uncomfortable because the challenge is colliding with the identity you're holding. Your self-image sets the ceiling for how long you'll stay in the fight. Think about someone training for a marathon. Two runners could be equally fit, but one has always seen themselves as a person who gives up when it gets too hard. The other sees themselves as a finisher, no matter what. When the exhaustion sets in and every muscle screams to stop, both will feel the same pain. But the one with the self-image of a finisher will keep going because quitting is incompatible with who they believe they are. The one with the self-image of a quitter will slow down, rationalize, and eventually step off the track, not because they physically couldn't continue, but because mentally they didn't see themselves crossing that line in the first place. Your self-image is built over years through your experiences, the opinions of others, the words you've spoken to yourself, and the evidence you've gathered about your own abilities. Every time you succeeded, it left a mark. Every time you failed and accepted the failure as permanent, it left a mark too. The danger is that most people let their self-image be shaped by default rather than design. They collect their memories like unedited footage, allowing the negative moments to weigh just as heavily, if not more heavily, than the positive ones. Over time, this creates an identity that feels fixed, like this is just who I am. But self-image is not fixed, it's programmable. And when you raise your self-image, you raise the threshold for how much you can endure. Negative feelings attack you most powerfully at the level of self-image. When you're tired, discouraged, or facing setbacks, your mind will reach for the most familiar story about yourself. If that story says, "I'm not strong enough," or "I never follow through," the negative feelings will land with full force because they align with that belief. They feel like confirmation. But if your self-image says, "I'm the kind of person who pushes through," the same negative feelings are interpreted differently. They become temporary obstacles rather than proof of weakness. The feelings still show up, but they don't stick as long because your identity rejects them. This is why people with a strong self-image can endure seasons that would break someone else. They're not immune to fear, doubt, or frustration. They simply don't identify with those feelings. They see them as passing weather, not as a definition of who they are. Because of this, they can keep moving forward even when it feels like nothing is working, simply because quitting would contradict the person they know themselves to be. The process of upgrading your self-image starts with awareness. You have to be brutally honest about the story you've been telling yourself. Listen to the way you speak when you're under pressure. Pay attention to the excuses you give, the limits you assume are true, the labels you've adopted without question. Every one of those is a clue to how you see yourself. Once you've identified the patterns, you can start rewriting them, not by forcing yourself into situations that overwhelm you immediately, but by creating small wins that prove to your subconscious you're capable of more than you thought. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, you add a brick to a stronger self-image. Each time you do something you once thought you couldn't, you raise the ceiling on your endurance. Over time, these moments compound. You stop seeing yourself as someone who might succeed and start seeing yourself as someone who always finds a way to succeed. And when that belief takes root, your endurance expands naturally because the thought of quitting doesn't even feel like an option you'd seriously consider. It's also important to realize that your self-image is influenced heavily by the people you surround yourself with. If you're constantly around people who expect little from themselves, who give up easily, who normalize quitting when things get hard, it will feed a low self-image without you even noticing. On the other hand, if you're around people who challenge themselves, who push through difficulty, who talk and act like winners, it will begin to shift how you see yourself. You'll start to internalize their standards, and your own will rise to match. Visualization is another powerful tool for reshaping your self-image. When you vividly imagine yourself succeeding, enduring, and overcoming, you're sending your subconscious mind a new blueprint. The more often you play that mental movie, the more familiar it becomes, and the more your subconscious works to make it reality. The mind doesn't fully distinguish between what's vividly imagined and what's actually experienced, so the more you experience yourself as someone who endures, the more natural it becomes to act that way in real life. Your self-image also dictates how you interpret failure. If your identity is fragile, every setback feels like proof that you were never good enough to begin with. But if your identity is strong, you see failure as feedback, not a verdict. You adjust, you learn, you try again, and each attempt reinforces the image of someone who doesn't stop until they win. That resilience becomes part of your emotional DNA, and it allows you to face negative feelings with calm certainty instead of panic or despair. The ceiling of your endurance is not set by your physical strength, your resources, or even your skills. It's set by the picture you hold of yourself when no one is watching. If that picture is small, every challenge will feel bigger than you. If that picture is big, no challenge will feel impossible. Your ability to withstand discomfort, delay gratification, and keep moving forward will always rise or fall to match the level of your self-image. The moment you decide to raise that image, you also decide to raise the limits of what you can handle, how far you can go, and how long you can last when the road gets hard.